I think your book is really well timed. The most recent one, which is Renaturing, which is about restoring nature today in the landscapes that we've inherited, in which we have become very disconnected with nature. And I've noticed that with smaller spaces, we're often quite crap at making provision for wildlife. When you think of kind of the landscape design industry or the horticultural industry, it's often about buying exotic, fancy plants from the garden centre, nothing native, which these exotic plants which provide nothing for invertebrates or for birds. It's often about tidiness and sweeping up and creating hard spaces of concrete and decking and so on. So what is the answer, James, for the average person, who's lucky enough to have influence over even a very small patch of land? How do we restore natural abundance to our lives in that way?
I mean, I heard the stat the other day, something like 27 million people in Britain consider themselves gardeners. If you can harness those people, and as you say, in all kinds of ways, if you can get them thinking about their relationship with the natural world, with wildlife, with invertebrates, with bugs, with biodiversity, you're getting quite a big chunk of Britain heading in the right direction, if you like. So yeah, my book, Renaturing, really was about that idea of small-scale nature restoration. Everything from what I called my mini meadow, a kind of tiny little window box that I've kind of created, right the way up, as far as I'm concerned, to say 1,000 acres, because I don't, one of the journeys that I went on in the book, in writing the book, was discovering what rewilding really is. We have so many ways. I think if you did a survey and you asked people on the streets what rewilding was, you get a kind of myriad. There'd be a kind of generality. It was about bringing nature back. But, you have adverts now that talk about kind of rewilding your hair, using particular shampoos that will kind of make you feel more natural again. It's like...
I love Natalie Fee and her band's song, which was called Bring Back the Beaver, which is a kind of, a brilliant kind of women's lib and rewilding song because of the double entendre, which made me laugh a lot.
Exactly. In a way, like don't get me in any way wrong, I want to keep the word rewilding, but we need more words, we need more language with this, because otherwise it just becomes very, very simple relationship with nature, doesn't it? So and one of the things that I think was key for me is I come from London. I'm a kind of urban kid at heart, if you like, and I was very fortunate. About 25 years ago, I moved to the countryside, and I moved to a very small village in rural North Essex. And that was kind of the journey, the starting point really of the journey of the book, Renaturing.
So I want to just read you a stat that I found this morning by chance relating to North America. So Americans spend more than $36 billion every year on lawn care, which is 4.5 times more than the entire government budget for environmental protection. I mean, it's just staggering. And if half of American lawns were replaced with native plants, Americans would create the equivalent of a 20 million acre national park, which is 9 times bigger than Yellowstone. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. And so it's not all necessarily about agriculture. It's about tidiness, and it's about a need for control and order in the landscape that has simply expunged wildlife and nature from our lives. And I think that is the biggest cultural challenge we've got in reconnecting people with nature, is embracing self-willed natural processes and understanding that mess is beauty, and that we've misconstrued what mess is.
Mess is so important, but I think as well, if I can add in, I think there's an urban context to this. I think my journey of coming from London, from a kind of urban centre, and in a way an urban mindset. I'd lived around the world. I lived in Cairo, lived in big cities around the world, and I suddenly realised that I'd never lived in the countryside. So when I moved to the countryside 25 years ago, went to visit a small, went to have a little viewing of a small farm labourer's cottage that myself and my partner wanted to buy. Around the back, over a green lane, which was very enticing, there was a sign that said for sale on a field. And this, I was like, what? A field? I'm not meant to buy a field. I come from London. We don't buy fields. That's farmers. Farmers have fields. And it was a small, 2 acre plot, X bit of farmland. And that really sold it for me. So we bought the cottage, we bought the field, moved in, and then I was very much, by the time we moved in, it was May. I'd seen it in February. All the grass, funnily enough, had grown up to about my waist. And my partner said, what are you going to do with this field then? And I was, I was like, well, good question. And all I could really think of was to have a cricket match, to have a yearly cricket match, get all my mates from London up. We'd have a cricket match in the field. We could all camp in the field, have a nice party. And so that's what I did. So again, as you say, it almost like the idea of tidying up, of kind of creating flat, kind of dead, green concrete spaces, if you like. It was still within my head. That's what I thought I'd do.
So I can't tell you the number of people among my kind of wider friends and colleagues and beyond who mentioned to me, oh, we've got a couple of acres, we live in the country, we've got a big garden, or, we've got this field, but we don't really know what to do with it. And of course, we can't really do rewilding. We don't have enough space for that. And people don't know what to do. And so the normal thing is, well, I'll just let the neighbor run their sheep there. Or I'll get a ride-on lawnmower. My friends who I visited in Bruton yesterday for tea, they've got a ride-on lawnmower, and he absolutely loves zipping up and down and making sure it's all tidy. And it's a big piece of land. He's got, maybe 2 acres, which could be absolutely full of wildlife. I said he should put some trackers on his children and see where they're running around on the lawn and commit only to mowing the spaces that they're using, to play their football or whatever, and leave all the rest. If it's not walked on except for when it's mowed, then it ought not to be mowed.
That's a really good steer.
But there's a brilliant guy who lives near me who's been on this podcast called Jonathan Thompson.
Oh,
and
yeah,
yeah. And with his wife, Keggy Carew, who's an author, they sold up in London and they bought 22 acres near Tisbury. And he has pioneered rewilding small spaces. He's figured out how you recreate natural processes on a space anywhere from 1/4 of an acre to 30 or 40 acres, spaces that are too small to have a herd of cows or some pigs. And in effect, you have to be the keystone species. He will get volunteers in and they will be bison with chainsaws or hacksaws for a day, or they will be beavers and they'll create analog beaver dams along the stream, or they'll be wild boar and they'll create disturbance in the earth. And it's a different kind of woodland gardening, and it's much more hands-on than larger scale rewilding approaches. And the results are just miraculous. You go there and the right time of year, you can feel the birdsong pulsating in your bones, and just the joy this has brought Jonathan Thompson. And his message is, if you can afford it, if you've got savings, or if you've got a house that you're willing to kind of trade and move out and get some land somewhere else, and a cottage somewhere, get yourself a bit of land in one way or another. And if you can't, then volunteer with the local wildlife organisations. I'm sitting right now half a mile from Heel, Somerset. They're rewilding 460 acres, and it's absolutely teeming with volunteers and students and forest school and kids and everything. Not huge numbers of people are participating in this unbelievable reawakening of nature on a former dairy farm. So I think this is the route to one of the most important routes to well-being and happiness.
Yeah, and without a doubt, we've got the stats to prove it as well. If you need statistical evidence. But I mean, everything that you said, absolutely. I think I've rather sort of stumbled through this process over the last 25 years. So my story, the story that I tell in Renaturing is this movement away from the cricket pitch, if you like, the sit-on mower every 2 weeks, cutting down the best part of 2 acres. And essentially about 15 years ago, starting the process of moving to what I called rewilding at the time, and which was essentially just leaving the edges, and it's most of the time it's just letting nature do its thing. So letting the jays plant the acorns and letting them turn into oak trees that became what are now what I call the young oaks, and they took over the edges of this field. And we still continued for a little while having this cricket match. The pitch became worse and worse, and then I just said, right, this is it. About 10 years ago, it's like no more, and started to just leave areas far more, started to cut back some bramble, started to do my own little bits and pieces of what I thought was the right thing. And then what I did, which I'd really advise, if you like, as you say, if you have friends or people have sort of 2 acres up to say 20 acres, what you want is people coming in who are kind of ecologists, naturalists. So I got in a really good friend of mine, Chris Gibson, who worked for Natural England for 30 years, is an absolute legend within my region. And I walked around with Chris and I said, yeah, so Chris, look, what I'm doing here is I'm rewilding my field. And he said, oh yeah, that is great. And I was sort of mansplaining rewilding to an ecologist. And he said, James, this is great. I love what you're doing. It is not rewilding. For rewilding to take place, you need minimum 1,000 acres, ideally more, this kind of thing. He said, what you're doing is renaturing. And that sort of opening up this terminology to allow someone like me with 2 acres. But one of the things I immediately started to consider was, what if I'd lived in London? So rewilding would be something that was impossible for me. What about renaturing? Can you renature if you're in an urban space? Of course you can. So it opens up this concept, if you like, that all of us as humans, whatever little bit of land we have kind of like oversight in, we can be introducing more biodiversity. We can be connecting with that natural world, even on a balcony, even on a window box level, you can be doing this. And obviously, certainly if you have a small garden, if you have a small suburban garden, you're not sure what you're doing with it. It's quite simple on a lot of levels for what you can do. Leave some nettles, leave some bramble, let the ivy grow up over the fences, stick a small pond in, make sure you've got some hedgehog holes, and suddenly, small scale nature restoration, what I call renaturing, you're starting to create. Then you start speaking to your neighbours. You get them doing it. You start creating these little green corridors within your urban space, and everyone's talking. Suddenly you've got your Merlin app going on a Sunday morning, and everyone's listening and saying, oh, was that a black cap? I think that was a black cap. And you're starting not only to actually physically be involved in this process, but you're starting personally to be intimately involved with the natural world.
So please subscribe and tap the notifications bells so you don't miss new content. And to listen to the full podcast episodes, please search for Rewilding the World on whatever app you use to get your podcasts.